Welcome to the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show.
Welcome to a podcast show about stuff. It's the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Here's your host, Stephen Davis.
Hi, I'm Lady Dr. Deanna Ziegler, President and CEO of Z Creators and Professor Emerita at Florida A&M University School of Journalism and Graphic Communications. I am also the author of the award-winning book, Midnight Train from Georgia. Midnight Train from Georgia is the story of William Franklin Guest, a founding member of the iconic singing group Gladys Knight and the Pips. William tells a story of the evolution of the group from their childhood roots in the gospel church in Atlanta, Georgia, to becoming global superstars. He shares the journey that took them from Atlanta to New York City's famous Apollo Theater, Detroit's Motown Records, and Buddha Records, where they recorded hit after hit, winning American Music Awards, Grammy Awards, leading to their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. William is my brother-in-law, so I've lived this story since I was 11 years old, and it was quite a journey. Midnight Train from Georgia is a story about family, faith, love, the entertainment industry, and harmony, where harmony is more than just the blending of voices, it's the blending of spirit. Midnight Train from Georgia is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Order your copy today.
Hello, welcome. Hello, welcome to the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. To me, all my shows are special and my guests are just simply super. Today, though, my guest, Walter Beach, a former AFL and NFL player in the 60s, a lawyer and an author, Dr. Richard Allen Williams, a cardiologist, a professor, an author, and a professional trumpeter, and Bobby Hunter, a professional basketball player with the Harlem Globetrotters from 1966 to 1974, a sociologist, and a motivational speaker, makes this episode so extra special. Let me now introduce you to my guest. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you all doing?
I'm doing fine.
I am as
I'm
well.
doing fine.
I'm pleased to meet the two gentlemen.
I want you to know again, we have Walter Beach, we have Dr. Richard Allen, and we have Bobby Hunter. One of the funny things that happened on the show with Bobby, that I did with Bobby, was during the broadcast. Now here he's in his 80s and I'm in my 70s, and we discover that we have relative ties.
That's excellent.
On the broadcast. And what he did was he introduced me to a young lady. She ain't so young because she's 84, but introduced me to this young lady, and she got on the phone. We started talking. I started talking about my grandfather, who was really my cousin. He was my mother's step-grandfather, but he was my father's cousin. And she started talking, and I said, my grandfather's name was Daniel Joseph. And there was a pause, and all of a sudden she says, Daniel Joseph was my father. Right there. So it's just wonderful having met Bobby, because we have so much ties in South Carolina, so much ties. But here, as I said to the audience, this is Walter Beach, former AFL and NFL player, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Dr. Richard Allen, he's coming to us from California,
Williams.
Him on the show before, but I thought that this was a very important show for archival purposes. With the knowledge that you all have and the experiences that you all have, younger folks should know who you are and why, and what your contribution to society was. I'm going to start off first with you, Mr. Beach. First of all, tell us, where were you born? And you could tell us how, when, if you want to.
Okay, all right, okay. I was born January 31st, 1933. My mother was in Tranquilla Beach, married to my dad, Walter Beach Jr. And I always say that I can't tell people who I am without telling them who my father was, because of the contribution that he made to my life. Pontiac, Michigan was the capital where they made the automobiles, the Pontiac automobiles. So it was an industrial city. And I would say 9 out of 10 of the adult Black families had a connection to the plant because everyone worked in the automobile plant. And it was a small community. I was always supported and felt very comfortable in my communities. Rarely did we go on in Pontiac, what we call the north side, where the Caucasians live. We always stayed on the south side of Pontiac. So I grew up in a Christian community, and it was a very closely knit community. And I always felt real comfortable about my friends and associates in that community.
Tell me about your mother and your father.
My father was a deputy sheriff at that time. So in Pontiac, they had 3 police officers, none of whom could arrest white folks. So all they did was do the police work within the community that had impact on the community. So although he was a deputy sheriff, and that's what he did. My mother was a homemaker, and she went to church. So I grew up going to church every Sunday. And one of the experiences that I remember by going to church every Sunday, my father only went to church on Mother's Day, and if someone in the community died. That's the only time he went to church. Every Sunday we would go to church as we passed what we call the corner in Pontiac. There would be 5 or 6 males in our community hanging out in their zoot suits. If you remember the zoot suits, they'd have on the zoot suits and hats, and my dad would be one of those. And as my mother took me and my sister Shirley to church, if it was 7 people on the corner, I had to go up and say, "Good morning, Mr. Muscovally." And then go shake the hand of Mr. Dinkins and then Mr. Rochelle. And that's the way we had to, that was the way to work. So we'd always had to acknowledge everybody as I went to Sunday school. And we stay in Sunday school all day, from Sunday school to church, and from church to the Baptist BYPU. So I was reared in the church. My understanding of that had, of course, as I matured, it changed.
I'm sure Bobby can relate to this. My grandmother, my father's mother, I didn't discover till later on that when she was young, she was a hellraiser. But by the time I came along, she was the mother of the church. And they used to have lots of storefront churches. In Harlem, there was a liquor store and a church in the block.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we would have to, when I stayed with my grandmother during the year that I stayed with her, somebody had to go to church with her on Sundays. So we would fight over who would have to go, because she left at 7 o'clock in the morning and didn't get back home until 12 o'clock at night. And so everybody said, "No, it's your turn." You remember that, Bobby?
Yeah, that's I understand.
But now in actuality, you stayed in Pontiac until you were ready to go to college, or
No, I mentioned the first experience where the white teacher told me to put it on nigger black. That was an experience. When I had that experience, my mother went to school with me the next day. And of course, they didn't have the minstrel show because she negotiated that and had the apology for the use of the language. And that was when I was 9 years old.
Mhm.
And when I was in high school, same city, when I was in high school, I went to school every day, except in my senior year, I cut school one time and went to Flint, Michigan to see a woman, a girlfriend, because I was just not a woman, but girlfriend. So they called me in for cutting school. I didn't go to school. And the principal of the school talked to my mother and father and me as though we were less than human. He berated me, he berated my mother and my father. And in that particular mission, in that setting, I got up and walked out of school. So I quit school. And when I got home that night, my father told me, "You cannot live in this household if you don't follow our rules and our instructions." So I went and joined the United States Air Force. So I got my high school diploma when I was in the Air Force. So that was the experience. Now, when I come out of the Air Force, that's when I was invited to college.
On your experience in terms of your schooling, that in essence set up the precedent of how you conducted your life thereafter. Dr. Williams was from Wilmington, Delaware. Bobby Hunter was from Harlem. And those are two different settings in terms of how the experiences that you had in the educational system. How was it in Michigan?
Pontiac's right outside Detroit. Pontiac was a highly racially structured community. It was the South Side, the North Side. We couldn't go on the North Side. When I say we, I'm talking about colored people. That's what I use the word. Colored folks couldn't go on the North Side. And for me to go to elementary school, junior high school, and high school, we could only go down a road they called Orchard Lake. So we would go down Orchard Lake, and we had to stay on Orchard Lake to go into the school because they had signs, no color signs. And I guess we've all had that, we've shared that experience if we lived back in the 40s and 50s. They had signs and water fountains and signs. We had to make those particular kind of adjustments.
Dr. Williams, now in terms of where you grew up at, I know that on our broadcast we covered some of it, but remind the audience what kind of experiences you had when you went to grade school and high school.
As I mentioned, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, but my family came from Georgia, at least my father's side of the family, ahead of the Ku Klux Klan, which drove them out from that area of Georgia when he was a child. And that factored into what happened to me later in my life. That is, when I was a youngster in Wilmington going to segregated schools, I was always instructed by my father to be careful because I was a young black boy in a sea of whiteness, and there were no rights that I had that white people were required to observe. and just be on my P's and Q's and be careful. So that carried on into school. Although I was in a completely segregated school system, I went to school only with blacks from K through 12. I had some interactions with the white community and with white schools, mainly through the activities that I was involved in, like in track and field and in band and some other activities. But I was always under observance of the fact that I was a colored kid, not privy to the same rights and privileges that the white kids were getting, and that I was just lucky to be able to go to school at all, and lucky to have the hand-me-down books and so on and so forth that we had to use in school. I don't know how many other people on this call experienced that, but it was a second-class citizenship, to be certain. That was at a time when my late brother, who was a close friend of Joe Biden's in Wilmington, Delaware, back in the day, decided that he needed to do something a little different for me. And he used to take me when I was 5 years old to this place I thought was fantastic. It was called the Wilmington Public Library. And it's full of all these books and implements and so on and so forth that we could access and get more knowledge, actually, or additional knowledge than we got in the high school. And I ate it up. I was always at that library, and they had to put me out. My brother would take me there and come back and pick me up. But in any event, I became encouraged that there were things outside of I was being exposed to in my segregated school that I could look to, and that really jump-started my thinking about trying to achieve academic excellence in my life. And just to close the circle on that, library is possibly going to be renamed for me at sometime in the near future. They have already named a street for me outside of my high school, Howard High School in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware.
Tell him what the cross street is.
Oh, Clifford Brown. Yeah.
Clifford, okay, trumpet player.
Yeah, Clifford Brown was my trumpet teacher.
Oh, wow.
Player.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
he's the best in the world. He was a contemporary of mine at my high school.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Went on from there, of course, to jazz greatness. Unfortunately, was killed in an auto accident at the age of 25. He was my hero.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Williams, my wife's an entertainment lawyer.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
And her clients are jazz musicians.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so I was familiar with Clifford Brown because I like jazz.
Uh-huh.
But I'd like to just say something to parallel what you talked about. I had just the opposite experience. I went to an integrated school, although the city was highly segregated, but there was only one school system. And I come out and in that integrated school system, it became obvious to me, based on my parents, when they used to say, and my grandmother used to say this, boy, you can run as fast as white people. You can read as well as white people. So when I went to school, I had to learn the English and the grammar, syntax, and what all nouns, pronouns, and all that stuff. I took Latin, and I also took geometry and trigonometry. So my experience was the fact that I could actually experience the fact that I was, if not equal to white boys, I was superior to them in a lot of times. And the next time I had that particular experience was at Yale Law School, when Professor Eugene Rostow said, in this case, Marbury versus Madison, you argue the primary premise as opposed to the minor premise. And a white boy put his hand up and he said, what's the difference in the minor premise and the major premise? And you know who that white boy was? His grandfather was the President of the United States, Seth Taft, who subsequently became one of the attorney generals for the state.
Who was the professor that you referred to?
Eugene Rostow.
Rostow?
Rostow was my constitutional law professor.
Oh, boy.
The reason that I said it, when the young man, Seth Taft, responded to what was in the case of Marbury versus Madison, what was the major premise, the minor premise as opposed to the major premise, Professor Rostow said, Seth didn't know, and Professor Rostow said, Mr. Beach, tell him what's the major premise and what's the minor premise. So the point that I'm making, my experience has always dictated that those of African lineage and ancestry are not to be played with if you identify and if you accept that responsibility.
I want to bring into the conversation also.
I'm listening. This is great. I'm hearing history here.
But I want you to contribute some also, particularly from your perspective of being in New York, because New York always like to consider themselves at the top of the heap of everything, of which they're not, but they, in those particular days, you were from New York, you were something. How did, in terms of your own education, how did it go and how did it affect you?
Gee, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I tell the kids that I wasn't reading well and my mother told me I had bad manners. And this is 100 kids in front of me. And she said, go to Miss Reynolds. And I said, Miss Reynolds doesn't like me. And she said, tell her, please help you. So I went to Miss Reynolds. And when I tell the kids, I don't want to go to Miss Reynolds. And finally I say to Miss Reynolds, I'm not reading well. Will you please help me? And Miss Reynolds says, yes, I will help you. And then I say, thank you. And then as I'm walking away, Miss Reynolds said, Bobby, you're one of my favorites. I said, what? I'm in the back of the classroom drawing and joking and looking at Big Leg Pat. Harlem was number writers control the blocks. They wore Stetson shoes and they wore Italian suits and tie and shirt, and they had a skimmer, which is a hat, which is a sky, which in Detroit, they say, in Detroit and Chicago, especially Detroit, they say, keep your front straight.
Yeah, oh man.
And then I lived in a house on 29th Street, right off of Lenox Avenue. 55 was nicely designed. I had three aunts in there, two cousins, a grandmother, and a mother. So I thought I was rich until I was about 14. And if you wonder, you could go downstairs and stay all day, just don't cross the street. No cursing, no guns. And then you slept on the roof.
Yeah, night. Yeah.
As I said I had a video because they stopped letting me go talk about drugs. I said, we were free, and in 1957, somebody stole the laundry off the roof. And we said, who was stealing the laundry? That's when we found out we had drugs in our neighborhood. I did not know what prejudice was. I didn't know what prejudice was. I know that when I went down south, I wanted to outwork them kids down south, and I get up 6:30 in the morning and pick 2 rows of cotton. And I say, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. But my mother told them, don't let him go to town by himself because he don't understand. My grandfather was Shotgun Wesley. He was an officer there in South Carolina. He wasn't an officer, but he had a shotgun. And don't come around his area messing around.
That made him an officer.
Yeah, don't come around his area messing around. So I tell the kids what I learned was getting up 6 o'clock in the morning and going to work. Because when my grandmother came up from down south, Miss Mink, and from Utahville, and she saw us playing basketball, she said, she pointed out some people that wasn't going to play. She said, because they can't get up in the morning, they don't work. So I didn't know what prejudice was until Emmett Till. I was 12 years old, I think he was 13, and find out he got killed for whistling at a white girl. I didn't know anything about that whole prejudice thing because I was watching, the Long Ranger on TV, and I had the only TV in the block. And I'd go to the house collecting money from my relatives, and then I control the cashing bottles. And I played stick ball, stoop ball, and then I'd be drawing. And then I was black. I wasn't colored. It wasn't the N word. I was black, and I grew up black. That was great. Till Emmett Till, I didn't understand anything about prejudice until I went to Nashville, Tennessee in 1960. And someone came by in a car and they called me the N word. And I got a rock and started throwing at the car. And then a guy stopped and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "You can't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, you can't do that. He says, "I work with IBM and the FBI and the Ku Klux Klan." And he took me back to the campus. I had a mentor. His name was Holcomb Rucker. He mentored about 1,000 kids in the metropolitan area. He told me, if you don't stop that drawing and dancing and singing, and you're going to end up pushing a cart on 34th Street. I said, pushing a cart? I can't push no cart. I want to dress like the number writers and wear the Stetson suit, Stetson shoes, and be cool. And go dancing and do the Lindy at the Rennie. Yeah, no, we ain't had no suit, man. They were cool. They had a 3-button, and then they had a 2-button. And then you couldn't wear your cuffs any further than the end of your jacket. And then your pants had to be 1 inch over your shoes, and your shoes had to be shined, and your stitches had to be clean. And then I was trying to imitate Nat King Cole. Holcomb Rucker told me, he said, "Listen here, you're going to end up pushing a cart, and you won't be able to be like your family there, taking care of you and taking care of other people and doing anything. So you're going to have to go to the library and cut this crap out because you just think you're cool and life is everything. But there's another life." And he had a pitch in his voice that was different than any other voice. And it got into my ear. And I was able to listen and do what he said. And he said, "Now you're able to play basketball because you're able to go get that ball. And people like you because you're able to dribble. And then you have a comfortable way about you." So I wanted to be him. So for 60 years, it's actually more than that, I've been going to basketball clinics all over the country, imitating Holcomb Rucker, and then looking at me, whether it was a woman or a man or a kid or a boy, looking at me, and I said, "Oh, I know what you're trying to say. I know what you're trying to do. I know how you're trying to act. Let me tell you the real thing that's going to happen here." In Chicago, or Raleigh, North Carolina, where I was doing a clinic, and finally a young kid said, "Thank you." When he said thank you, I gave him $50. And I told the other kids, no one said thank you. And the first kids that said thank you, I give them $50. Because if you can go get the ball and play athletics, and then if you can say thank you, then you can communicate, then you're starting your way to life. Okay, if none of you understand nothing that I'm saying here, maybe I can help you another way. I can teach you how to get to be 83. I said, I didn't study. And then I started studying because there was Black history in my family, and they would tell me about it. And it was different than I was hearing at school. So then I want to learn why I was hearing something different than actually was true, because my family spoke the truth. I tell them I went from UCLA, the corner of Lenox Avenue, to Stanford University. And I said, you can go too, because I wasn't smart. But what happened was I learned to listen. When I got to Tennessee and I failed the Regents, so I didn't go to Loyola. And I failed earlier, and I didn't get to go to art school. I had to go to Seward Park High School on the Lower East Side, where I was introduced to Jews, Italians, Chinese, Polish, and there's one more I missed.
Italians?
No, Italians. It was one I missed. I can't remember what it was, but it don't matter because we were having fun and we were dressing nice and we were being cool. And somehow the world was about to come to us because drugs was impeding the progress of Harlem, and Harlem was under attack, and we didn't know it. From the brownstone to the mama and papa grocery store that was on the corner that disappeared, to the church, to the bar, which all disappeared out of Harlem. So as I'm walking there at Nashville, going down Beale Street, where over there, I went to the Nashville Theater to watch a movie because I grew up watching movies and listening to white diplomacy of embellishment of propaganda stories. So I could tell you who got won an Academy Award in 1957. I could tell you how many movies Betty Davis was in, but I didn't know what Paul Robeson said. So as I'm sitting there in the movie, Wilma Rudolph came and she said, "You got to move from down here in the first row. You can't sit down in the first row." I said, "What do you mean? I go to Apollo, I go to RKO, I go to Loews in New York. I sit wherever I want." She says, "No, you in Nashville. You down south. You don't understand." So she was cute. So I did what she said.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I raced her one time behind the dorm for a kiss. And she took off. And years later, I asked her, "How come you didn't let me win?" She said, "I tried." Boy, she was attractive.
Yeah.
She came on campus with Muhammad Ali. He knew what he was doing. As me and Wilma was walking out of past the theater, we went past a Woolworths and whatnot, and there was John Lewis getting his head punched in, and I saw some people from New York, and so I told her, I said, "I'm going across the street." She says, "You can't go across there. You stay right here with me." She says, "Why?" She said, "Because you don't know how you 6'5" black walking like Sidney Poitier look to people." I never knew that. It took me a long while to know that. Maybe a lot of times it saved me. We went to a couple of parties there at Fish College with John Lewis. He was very interesting. I saw some group as I was running track in the woods, as they were beating up on a black person, calling him the N-word, and they were beating him, and then they had a rope around his neck, and then I left. But that always stayed in my mind, that piece. And Ralph Boston told me who they are and what they did. And he was black as I was. And he says, they look at you especially different than any other colored or African-American person. The way you walk, the way you look. I said, "Why is that?" He said, "You have to study and find out why, because once you were king and they were slaves, and they never forgot it." I tried to remember all of this when I got to Chicago, because I still wasn't there when the police grabbed me and put me against the wall. They had leather jackets and shotguns, and I laughed because it was like the police in New York. And the guy said, "He's laughing, something wrong with him." As I go to Detroit, go to Beale, go to Jefferson and whatnot, and hang out with Bob Hall, they were cool. We dressed the same, so we were able to communicate the same. And they wanted to teach me because they were involved with the early Ren players, Pop Gates and John Isaac. And so I was like a prince there. So I got a lot of great treatment. And then Abe Saperstein, I treated him different because he was nothing different than a number writer on the block that I'd be playing chess or playing pinochle against. I used to beat him playing pinochle and talk crap to him all the time. He came to Wilmington, Delaware, where I was playing for the Wilmington, Delaware team because I was in the Nick camp, and told me, he says, how much they gonna pay you? I said, 8,000. He said, I'll give you 16. So there was no choice. I went. I had some great experience there through Abe Saperstein because I met Jesse Owens.
Oh man,
and he would tell me about the experience he had in Europe and how he acted. He said not only winning it, but how he appeared, how he walked. When they would address him, how he would answer. He says, because I hear you answer the same way. As Satchel Paige was telling me, he says, you don't know where you're going. You don't know who I am. I said, what do you mean I don't know who you are? He said, New York fella, you don't know who I am. As I'd see Negro ball players come to the bus and bow their head as he came in. And they would try to tell me all that he did in the Negro League and for people throughout the community in some sort of green leaf that said where you could travel, what hotel you could stay. And he says, a lot of the prejudice you don't go through because you don't recognize it. And so they just walk right past you. So that experience was quite powerful. And I became vice president of Local 187 in Chicago. It was one of those South Carolina, my grandfather, Shotgun Wesley thing, where if you see a good fight, join it. That's something that you have to kind of get out of your system. And I fought Potter Palmer and that whole group because they were killing the community and they were trying to take back what Black people had there in Chicago, which was really united. And they said, we're paying you because they own the Atlanta Hawks, the St. Louis Hawks, the Atlanta Braves, a hockey team, some Black baseball, Negro League teams they own. They said, we're paying you. So why are you? I said, you're not paying everybody else. And you need to pay everybody else. And we need to act like you do in South Carolina. If you see someone that's not living well, then you bring them into your home. So there's a lot of things I learned from the South that were very useful in the North. And as years go along, I found out what world was I from because a man's word was how he lived and what he lived by.
Man,
I want to ask you first, I know all three of you all had high school and college experiences in terms of athletics. Bobby's told us a lot about him in terms of from the athletic side. I know, Mr. Beach, that you were a high school star, even though you quit, which was interesting. You were a high school star extraordinaire. You were also a college star extraordinaire. How did that shape your thinking at that time?
let me say, and I have this discussion with my grandchildren and other individuals. My personal position about sports is I consider sports to be the absolute reality of how societies function.
Amen.
Because sports, and I know, and I'm assuming, but I believe that Bobby feels the same way, and I'm not certain of what Mr. Williams' experience has been.
I do too.
Is that if you ever watch, and right now it's basketball season, watch the basketball games, the professional basketball games. And when the game is over, regardless of what team wins, one thing that LeBron knows is that Steph can play basketball. See, the reality of sports is I'm not talking about what sports announcers say. I'm talking about what the players say. if you one of the 15 players in the NBA today, you one of the 600 best basketball players on the planet. And ain't nobody's opinion can negate that. So in my experience as an athlete, I always knew who could play basketball or always know who could run track. I ran track against Ira Murchison. He was the Olympic track champion. He won the Olympics. Hayes Jones is from Pontiac, Michigan. Hayes Jones was my little god brother.
Hurdler, wasn't he?
Huh?
Wasn't he a hurdler?
Yes, he was a hurdler. He won the World Olympics. He was a World Olympic champion as a hurdler.
Yeah, I
But
remember.
when I was running track, he couldn't even make the track team.
Wow.
But the point I'm making, I want to make this point clear because I think it's important, is that why that is, and each of you, if you played, and I listened to all of the basketball players that Bobby was talking about. And I listened to him talk about Jesse Owens. And that history is just so real to me. And that's why I think your program is so important. We have to make it real to other members of our community. Is that I played against a guy named Art Powell. He played with the Jets. I covered him all day. And every time Art tried to catch the pass, I was in his shoulder pads. And I said, man, you're not going to do nothing. Because you know how we do and how we talk stuff when we on top. And in the last quarter, Art Powell ran what they call it, the language that we use. He ran what we call a false shape. And as he tiptoed into the end zone, catching the pass, he looked back at me and he said, hey, Beach, he said, you'll be good now, won't you? The point I'm making is that all day he couldn't catch a pass. But as an athlete, you know that you cannot stop doing what you're doing because it ain't never over until it's over.
Yes.
And when you walk off the field, you know who done put their heart in the game and you know what their skills and talent are. And that's why I always thought that sports was what would reveal the essence of who the human being is.
I agree with you 100%. Question though, what was your relationship with Jackie Robinson and Woody Stroll and that other person that was with him that was a quarterback?
I never had a personal relationship with either one of them. Like I said, my understanding, I thought highly of. Jim Brown was the professional athlete that I had to experience with when I was with the Cleveland Browns. And in '64, when we won the championship as the world champions. But that is consistent with what you're saying about the athletes that you talked about and Jim.
Tell me, you just mentioned it. What was your personal feeling on that day in 1964? And I have to say, I saw the game in live. I don't know whether I should admit that or not, but I saw it live. How did you feel going into the game and then having won? And
Educate us on what game you're referring to.
The game that he was just talking about, the NFL
Baltimore Colts.
game.
We played the Baltimore Colts in 1964.
That was my team, the Baltimore Colts.
Baltimore was supposed to kill y'all.
Right, they were supposed to.
That was my team,
and we beat them 27-0 in the championship game.
That was my team, Baltimore Colts.
Yeah, and in fact, I was fortunate enough to intercept a pass in that game, but we beat them 27-0. And I want to say that experience. When I walked off the field, I can't even recall my feet touching the ground. I was so happy and so charged emotionally. But what I'd like to share with you about that at Cleveland Stadium is 90,000 people in the stands. And I played professional football for 6 years. And every time I played professional football, I could look up in the stands and see my father and all his confidants. And they would all, now I don't know if, I guess it might be part of the language, but they would all be, they'd all be drunk. They'd be grogging up there. My daddy and Mr. Big Boy and Mr. Rochelle. So I was always reinforced and felt so happy about what I was doing because my community was always there supporting me. Even in those separated or separate experiences dealing with what I call whiteness. So I have a situation that I call 3+1, 3 experiences that I've had in my life that shaped my life. And one of them had something to do with professional sports. And I shared that thing with that I just shared with you about Art Powell catching a touchdown on me. And the lesson that I got is never over until it's over. But the 3 experiences I had was the one, and Mr. Hunter talked about it when he talked about somebody with a shotgun. My grandmother told me that she was from Kentucky, and when she had to walk on the sidewalk, they didn't have sidewalks, they had wooden walks back in the early 1900s. And if you walked off the wooden walk, you walked into the mud. And she said, my grandfather, her husband, Walter Beach Sr., had a bandolier around him, a pistol on his hip, and a shotgun. And he walked the streets. And my grandmother told me that she was the only Black woman, African American or colored woman, who walked on the wooden sidewalk and didn't have to get off and walk in the mud because her husband walked the street with a shotgun and said she's not going to get off the street. Now, and I know you don't like the pejorative term, but my grandmother said the reason she did that, she referred to my grandfather as Beach. She said the white folks said Beach is crazy. He's a crazy nigger. So they did not do anything to my grandfather because he walked the streets and he had a shotgun and you couldn't come into his house unless you had to face that shotgun. So all I'm saying is that part of my life, my lived experiences, have me dealing with what I'll consider I'm always in opposition and resisting the colonial forces the best I can, given the resources that I have, the best I can. I'm not always humble, but I know I'm not scared. And my father taught me that. And I told you earlier about my dad, about church, about going to church. My father said, man, if you're scared, join church. That was his thing. He said, if you're scared, join church. I don't want you to be scared. You kill my dog, I kill your cat. That's just the way I was growing up. So I have a whole different perspective about life. I think life is an energy force. And so I don't think you can destroy this body, but you can't destroy the energy force that makes this body. That's just my philosophical principle about it. So my situation, I've always been resistant. I was a professional Brown who was on an airplane going to Los Angeles to play the Los Angeles Rams. I was reading a book on the airplane. The book was The Message to the Black Man by Elijah Muhammad. The owner of the Cleveland Browns, Mr. Art Modell, came by on an airplane. He said, Walt, what are you reading? I showed him the book. Mr. Modell said, I don't want you to read that book, man. He said, I don't want you reading that book. Because Mr. Modell's a Jew. So when he comes back, I'm reading the book. He said, you reading that book? I said, yes, sir. He said, I'm quoting this verbatim. He said, I thought I told you I didn't want you to read that book. I said, you did. I said, but I thought you were joking. He said, why would you think I was joking? I said, I thought you were joking because a man can't tell another man what to read. Mr. Modell, you own this football team, but you don't own me. So you can fire me, pay me, let me go, do what you want to do. That's the lived experience that I had dealing with, if you want to call it Jim Crow, segregation, racism, I call it ownership. See, I played professional football. I was somebody else's property, man. A lot of people don't believe these guys play basketball now, they make millions of dollars. But LeBron's is somebody's property. You can see that in the game. He was playing with another guy and they traded him. They can do what they want to do. So we're not really totally free human beings. So all I'm saying is that our hypocrisy can only go so far. We're all hypocrites. We're in America. We're taking the benefits as well as the good aspects about it. But it depends on where you draw the line. I'm not going to be a slave in the traditional sense.
Dr. Williams, I know that you participated in sports in high school, right?
Yes.
But
And
your focus was more on academics and music. It was apparent from when you talked before on the show, on the episode that we did together. How did that prepare you as you were moving forward?
before I say anything, let me just comment on what Mr. Beach just mentioned and
Okay.
has been mentioning throughout this. I have learned a great deal through his comments and also the comments from Billy Hunter. This has been very valuable. I hope it is to other people, because even though I'm late in the game, so to speak, I'm 89 years old, it's never too late to learn something from somebody else who's had other experiences. And that's been something that I've held to throughout my life, listening and learning, and then acting on what I've learned. So to answer your question in regards to what experiences I had and how that impacted upon my career, I could go on all day and all night about all that. But let me simply address some things that resonate with what we're talking about on this program, and that's mainly the impact that other people, maybe people in sports, might have had on me. The biggest impact that a sports figure had on me was when I met Jackie Robinson when I was in what is now called middle school.
Amen.
He came to Wilmington, Delaware, dressed sharp as a tack. I'll never forget, I thought he had the broadest shoulders of anybody I ever saw. And he addressed my school, my little Howard High School in Wilmington, Delaware, came all the way down there and this was, I think it was 1949, to address this school full of only black kids and give us some a ray of hope as to what we could do. And I got a chance to ask him a question, telling him that I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up and what he thought about that. And he said, hold to your dreams. You can do it. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't, because there were people in my school and my community who would laugh when I said I wanted to be a doctor, coming from the ghetto of Wilmington, Delaware. He said, forget about that. You got the smarts to do it. You got the ability, the will, and just keep on pushing on. I'll never forget that. So that was something that I learned from a sports figure rather than just something that I observed him do on the field, which was incredible.
Of course.
My biggest takeaway about Jackie Robinson was what he told me off the field and his example that he set off the field. And the fact that he was also someone, as Mr. Beach mentioned, who was not going to be owned by somebody just because he played for the team. He was his own man, his own person. And I learned to be the same way. So that's a lesson that I learned.
Great,
Uh,
great.
and
But talk to me about they talked about their experiences in sports. Talk to me about your experiences in music in particular, because you juxtapose your being a doctor, people don't think of you as being a trumpeter, and then you add the word professional trumpeter. You could be an amateur trumpeter and a doctor, but not a professional trumpeter and a doctor.
I get you. I'll be very quick with that because I don't think that what I can add on that is as important as what these other gentlemen are bringing to the mix. But I became a professional jazz trumpet player in on one particular night, and that was at the age of 14 after I had been tutored by Clifford Brown at my high school in Wilmington, Delaware. I got a gig with a big band which was playing at the Apollo Theater in New York. So I got a chance to play my first professional jazz gig at the age of 14
Oh man.
at the Apollo. I'll never forget it on Lenox Avenue,
Oh, I
125th
can't forget
Lenox.
that.
And that experience, that whole experience going up there. I don't tell people much about things like that because they tend to focus on my professional medical achievements, but that was a big deal to me. And by the way, at that gig, I met a young man who was playing piano in the basement of the Apollo where the musicians warmed up. And he was just tearing it up on this piano. And I asked somebody, I said, who is that? This guy is really amazing. And they said, oh, his name is Earl Garner.
Oh man.
I said,
Oh,
oh, okay.
I want to say this,
Yeah,
especially Bobby's talking about it and Doc's talking about it. If our young people even knew the magnitude of the impact of the names that's just been said on your program, that's history, man.
that's
I mean,
definitely
the
it.
names, the basketball players, the musicians. Oh man, I'm excited just to, because I know who Earl Garner is, and he wasn't just a piano player,
No, no question about it.
Yeah.
But
Oh man.
with other things regarding my musical experiences, I was fortunate to be to do very well, let's say, in high school. I set some records and so forth, and some people singled me out and said, "This young man may have the ability to go far, and we're going to see if we can get him into an elite university, which was Harvard University." These guys came around, and you know how they do in sports, they scout you out as
Yeah.
potential sports figure. That's what they did with me in the academics. And I found out that these were representatives of the Harvard Club. At that time, I was 15 years old. And they came up to me one day and they said, we were looking for somebody to be the first black student or Negro student from the state of Delaware to attend Harvard. And we're looking at you. I said, oh, okay. I said, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do that because I can't pay those fees. And they said, don't
Mhm.
worry about it. Just keep on doing what you're doing. And I did. And so they came back later after I did achieved a 99 percentile on the college boards and all that stuff. And they said, we're going to offer you a full ride to Harvard. And I was only 16 years old.
Wow.
And I said, I don't know about that. Maybe I'm a little young. And he said, don't worry, we think you can do it. So I took the scholarship, went to Harvard at the age of 16. And that was maybe a phenomenal thing to think about. But even more phenomenal to me was that was where I met Miles Davis,
Wow. Okay. All right.
my second mentor in music on the trumpet. And there's a long story behind that, but that I can't get into now. But Miles took me under his wing at the age of 16 and started teaching me a lot of stuff about the trumpet and about life. He became a
Oh,
lifelong friend, eventually became my patient when I became a cardiologist.
okay.
And I can't say enough about the influence that he had on my life and my career. So
Man,
that's bringing some things together in
no,
regards to what I
that's
did.
magnificent. I just want to say I honor you for all that. You've just talked about Miles Davis and the other trumpet player,
Clifford Brown,
Clifford Brown.
yeah.
And I'm saying for me and to me, it's just so important to hear the
Now, I'll mention one
story.
other thing that might resonate with you as a citizen of New York City. I played at Birdland twice
Okay.
with Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers, sat in with them, and
Yes.
also with John Hicks and a number of the other guys, later Jazz Messenger groups.
Yes,
So
sir.
I want you to
I
tell
was
a
walking
story.
in tall cotton.
I want you to tell a story, Dr. Williams, about the time that you took off for a year from Harvard to go to medical school, and you were with Lou Donaldson. He said
From
that
South Carolina.
he said that he had a woman that was going to sing that night.
Oh, okay. This was like around 19, I think 1956. And I was a junior at Harvard. And during my summers, I'd go and get some gigs around New York City and Newark and so forth, played with some really fine people. And I got a gig with this gentleman named Lou Donaldson, who's from South Carolina, by the way, a great alto sax player. Just died last year at the age of 98. And so he had heard about me and heard me, said, I want you to come and play with my group at this place called Teddy Powell's Lounge in Newark, New Jersey. And so I went over there. Actually, I was living in East Orange with my sister at that time during that summer. And so when we got up on the set, he said, gentlemen, tonight we're going to have a special guest singer, a vocalist. I said, who is it? He said,
Mm.
oh, don't worry about it. You'll know who it is when you see her.
I'll be Ella Sarah.
Nope.
Wasn't either one of them.
So we got up on this thing. We played our three obligatory tunes to start things off. And then the owner, Teddy Powell, came out and he said, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I want to let you know that we've got a special guest tonight. And I think you'll recognize her as soon as you see her. They opened the curtains. And this lady walked out with a big gardenia, white gardenia in her hair. And that was Billie
Billie
Holiday.
Holiday.
Yeah.
Oh
So
man.
I was floored having
Oh
the
man.
privilege to play behind somebody like that at that point in my life. And she went on and just tore it up. And she
Yeah.
died the next year.
Yeah, Billie Holiday. Oh man. But just to think of the individuals that I call them the lived experiences that
Oh
you've
yeah.
had with
Yeah.
these individuals. And the reason that I'm impressed is that I know all human beings are normal, but these human beings that you're talking about in their particular profession
Super
is
normal.
is just the top of the top.
Yes.
Billie Holiday, man.
That was something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you, I had one experience with jazz musicians. I was in Germany. I was stationed in Landsberg, Germany, and I was taking leave, and I took a leave to the north from Germany to Copenhagen,
Oh, wow.
and
On the North Sea.
I was just an airman, and of course I like jazz. And I heard a brother yell out, "Hey Gates, hey Gates!" I'm up there on leave, and this is like I said, Copenhagen ain't a whole lot of black folks up there. And I looked out,
Dexter
and
Gordon.
Lionel Hampton.
Oh, wow.
It was Lionel Hampton. He said,
Oh,
"Hey Gates," and I said, "Yeah,
that's what he called everybody.
yeah, yeah." He called
He called
everybody
everybody
Gates.
Gates.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
called everybody Gates. He said,
you're
"Hey
right.
Gates." I said, "Yeah." Now I'm in my Air Force uniform,
Yeah.
and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm good, man." And "Who are you?" I told him who I was. I said, I'm in the Air Force." He said, "I'm having a concert, and I want you to come." So he invited me to the concert,
Wow.
and I was backstage with him, and he played, and for 45 minutes, he ended it on "Flying Home."
I'm gonna have to
Oh,
take a
yeah.
break right here.
That was his big
Just
tune. What year was that? Do you know? Remember?
Let's see.
Was it in the 60s?
I think it was in the late 56 or 57,
Oh,
something like
wow. Yeah. That's
56.
before I got there because I was in Germany in the 60s.
Yeah, yeah.
In the
So that's why that was
Army.
my experience with one of those prestigious, uh,
Music.
world-renowned individuals in their profession.
Yeah,
And
Hamp was something else.
yeah, Hamp was, he played "Flying Home." I said, "Man, they're gonna never finish this song." But he was a musician, and like I said, I was in the mood. I heard this, "Hey Gates." I didn't even know what was going on, man.
So I also had some experiences with some other musicians that you would recognize, especially from the New York, Jersey, and Philly area, one of whom was John Coltrane. I got a chance to play with him in Brooklyn at a place called the Blue Coronet Cafe, a jazz club on Nostrand Avenue.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Brooklyn,
had
yeah.
some great experiences with some great musicians.
Yeah, that Brooklyn was part of one of the experiences that I had.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
the youth coordinator for the city of Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
Carl Stokes was the mayor, and I was hired by Carl Stokes as the youth coordinator. And I know in that picture with Muhammad Ali when he didn't go to the draft.
I love
Yeah,
that
well, I'm
picture.
in that picture with Carl Stokes and Jim Brown and Muhammad
Uh-huh.
Ali.
Hey, there
And
was a place
Kareem.
in Cleveland.
Kareem.
It was they call it the Downstairs Jazz Club or something like that. I went there I think it was in the 80s. I don't know whether existed when you were there, but
No, when I was there, the jazz club was Mr. Leo's.
okay, I don't remember that one because
Yeah, Mr.
I was
Leo.
only in Cleveland once. And
Okay.
there was a play a gig at this place. You had to go down these stairs to the jazz club, and they call it the Downstairs Jazz Club.
Oh, okay, okay. No, I wasn't familiar with it. The only one I'm familiar with going downstairs is the what is it? The Bottom Line, New York.
no, that was the Village Vanguard.
Yeah, all right, okay, the
Down
Oh
Village
the
yeah,
Van.
the Vanguard.
the
Yeah,
bottom line was level.
okay.
But one of the things that I do want to mention to the audience is that you all have been involved in varying things over your life that has had an impact on society. And that's wonderful. But the thing that I admire about each one of you all is that you didn't see, particularly coming out of the 30s and 40s and 50s, a plethora of men, black men, who have not just degrees, but advanced degrees that went on to some of the major colleges in America, but still gave back, still looked back on their shoulders. And this is an important thing for the youth of today to have in mind. This is my opinion. They have direction in terms of the opportunities of making monies, but their socialization is lacking to have empathy for those folks who are behind them. Not all, I'm not talking about all youth, because there's a lot of them out there, but some of the major people who have the ability to make a difference, that's not what they're thinking about. And a lot of it is because when growing up, you all had communities. I always think of my great grandmother had a sister in 1917, although she had died by then, but her sister was going to Allen University. And at that time, not a whole lot of black women went to universities because the emphasis on getting a male to do this. And the communities would pool their monies together on someone that they thought could help the communities coming back. And the day she was a senior in college, going back to Allen University, they had a celebration for her. And on that day in 1917 in Vance, South Carolina, a thunderstorm rolled through and it struck her and she died.
Oh, that's the lightning strike.
A lightning strike.
You told me about before, yeah.
And the community was devastated, not just because she died, and of course, there were relatives and stuff, but because they had put their hope in her in order to help the community. And we always need, but we need our community to look upon themselves as a community, and no matter how high, even if they move away, to reach back, not just in terms of giving something to a certain individual, but giving something to the community that can lift itself up, that can help lift itself up. So I appreciate the fact that you all, throughout the course of your life, no matter how high you got, I think of you, Dr. Williams, as here you were a young man, and the first thing that you thought about was forming the Association of Black Cardiologists.
Mm.
That's reaching back at a very young age, and it's still 50 plus years later in operation. Okay. I think of you, Bobby, going to the different schools, I just think of last week you went to Chicago. That's important. That's so important. And of course, I think of you, Mr. Beach, because you were the president of America I Can.
Let me what I wanted to say about that guy called me this morning. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm blessed, man." I said, "I'm blessed beyond measures." And from my grandmother said, "If you bless, you got to be a blessing."
Exactly.
She said, "If you bless,
Yes.
you got to be a blessing." And my daddy used to tell me, daddy used to say, "Man, you make money, don't make you." So a lot of the young people, and especially some of the young athletes that make all this money, is more important to them than anything else. And I was just responding on a Facebook with this brother that plays with the Boston Celtics, Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown got a shoe contract of $50 million. That's the contract that he has. And he donated that $50 million shoe contract to a black school.
I saw him on TV, and I said, I'm so proud.
Oh, me too.
Oh my God, what a contribution! Wow. And my dad used to say, "Son, you're gonna do very well in life. That's predictable, but I want you to remember one thing: lift as you climb."
Yep. Yep.
My
Thomas got that in his studio. Lift as you climb.
Exactly.
As I go do the basketball clinics, I give out $10 and I put a basketball in the middle of the floor and two kids run and get it. And that my ability in sports was to go get that ball. And whether you're yellow, green, short, or tall, if you can go get that ball, if you're playing tennis, basketball, baseball, whatever, if you can go get that ball, you will be loved. You will feel like your friendship, you will feel warm within yourself. I said, there's a bench of life and a bus of life. Some people sit on that bench and others go right on the bus. So you have to decide who you're going to be and release that reflex in your body, because that reflex in your body will make you raise your hand in class. It'll make you take out the garbage. I want to tell y'all something. I was Jackie Robinson. See, I was Jackie Robinson.
Okay.
my daughter was working for Moody's here in New York, the rating service. And one day she called me up and said, I'm joining the New York City Board of Education program to get my master's degree, and I'm going to teach while I'm getting my master's degree. And I said to her, a teacher? They don't make no money. And she turned to me and she says, but Dad, you're the one who taught me to give back. There's nothing I could say to that.
Yeah.
Okay, there's nothing I could say. I thank you all so much for being on this wonderful conversation, because I don't do interviews, I do conversations. And I thank you all for being on this conversation. And look for me to call you all back again, be my senior advisors.
I appreciate the opportunity for meeting, for having the opportunity to share it.
Me too.
And I can't tell you how happy I was to be around history. You two guys are history.
Yes, you are.
I think of you two guys
so
as being history.
No, I was Jackie Robinson. I want y'all to remember that.
All right.
I walked pigeon-toed. I walked
Yeah, you were the
pigeon-toed.
first.
He sure was. You got it right.
You were the first.
To death, man. That was something else. One of the first things I noticed.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, that's it for the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show.
Thank you for tuning in this week. Hope you enjoyed this show about stuff. See you next time.